Hello, 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 and welcome. If you are here live, perhaps you could let me know, just give me a wave or a thumbs up. You can hear me, and also if the noise from my open windows, if that's distracting, or let me know if it's not distracting. And hopefully it's not. We're having a little heat wave up here in Northern California, and so I'm trying to keep my windows open today and see if I can let some air in. So come on in, let me know if you can hear me and if the street noise is distracting. And as I get going here, so good to see your faces as you pop up. It's always important to say that please join in the dialogue. I want to start talking about sacred sovereignty, which is, as an overall piece, really, really, really important to me. And then each of these pillars in and of themselves, honestly, maybe I'll expand on them later, but I want to talk about them as a whole system, actually, because they weave with each other. So as I dive into sacred sovereignty here, please bring your questions in the comments. Just wave and say hi. Send me a few hearts or likes. I always love that, the hearts. And, any shares about how this relates to your real life is always welcome as well. And I'm happy to try to answer any questions in specificity as we go. And this applies if you're watching the replay at any time as well. Thank you, Melanie. Because I will come back and I will respond in text if you're watching the replay. So welcome, whether you're live or watching the replay. Whew. So let me start with, honestly, I've been using the term sacred sovereignty for a while. And probably it's been 3 or 4 years. And it started partly with me using the term for a retreat that I lead for women. And then in that time, I've watched sovereignty as like a term sort of become a little hot, and especially for women. I think we're in this interesting wave right now where there's the teachings, though, that I want to speak to here around sacred sovereignty are absolutely applicable for men or women, if you're in your masculine or your feminine, for all genders. For this is not a conversation just for women, but that's where I'm hearing this kind of hot phrase of sovereignty come up lately. And I was really, I'm excited. I'm super excited to see that take hold a little bit more in the mainstream culture. And I've thought a lot about why putting, for me, the term sacred in front of sovereignty is important. And ultimately, I realized when I came up with these 4 pillars that this is why, that one of the ways, and this actually just touches on the very first pillar, which is the recognition that my life is not dictated by external circumstances. Now, this is incredibly, incredibly important, and it tends to be the pillar at which most conversations around sovereignty stop. So, sovereign, I actually meant to look up the word and I didn't. But we all kind of know that it means like unto one's self. And so that first pillar, again, it's hugely important, and I do want to dive into this a little bit more deeply. But it's not the only piece, especially of what I would call sacred sovereignty, which is as opposed to just like me being safe in and of myself. So this idea, the recognition that my life is not dictated by external circumstances, is really the realm in which I say, it doesn't mean that I'm not impacted by external circumstances, but any place that I might say, I can't fill in the blank because something in the external world dot, 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 fill in the blank for yourself. That is me saying that I am limited by external circumstances. Any place that I say I have to fill in the blank, because again, pointing somewhere into external circumstances, fill in the blank, that is a place where I'm putting myself, like my life is being dictated by external circumstances. So it is really important inside of this to recognize that it doesn't mean that external circumstances don't impact me. And I still might make choices, right? For instance, like I can't, I'm trying to think, I can't leave the house at night, like when my kids are asleep, because my children are in bed. In some sense, that's true. That's like a logically true statement. I can't leave them home alone. In another sense, like the way that my life becomes dictated by that, or I hate this word, I'm trying to think of a different one, like where I'm not a victim to it, but basically like I choose, is like, well, I choose not to leave the house when my children are here alone asleep, because I'm unwilling to be with the potential consequences of that. And that's a choice that I make, and that feels like a really good and empowered choice. But a lot of times the way we look at external circumstances is ultimately not like it, like, oh yeah, well, I choose not to deal with those circumstances. We're like, well, I can't, say that I want, to go to Italian instead of Mexican for dinner tonight, because he will get mad, or she will get mad. She will complain. And then we ultimately are saying my life is dictated by whether that person complains or gets mad. Now, there's a couple different things I could do in that, right? Where if I really am able to live in the realm, my life is not dictated by external circumstances, then I'm in the realm of either I can say that I would rather go to a different restaurant tonight because I am willing to be with if they are mad or if they complain. And now they may have a track record of showing me that they do those things, but I actually don't know what's going to happen in the future. None of us does. It's like, spoiler alert, you don't know. You can say I have, 1, 10, 100 examples of all the times when I've said I want something different and this is how they've responded. But you actually don't know what's going to happen tonight. And I could say, so I'm going to say where I would rather go to dinner tonight and see what happens, and trust that I can actually meet then the next moment of circumstances, that they might get mad or they might complain or they might say no, and that our actions do have consequences, and so do theirs. So that doesn't mean that we're not impacted or that there are not consequences that do come from external reality or external circumstances rather, but that my life is not dictated by them. Now, I could also say, I'm not going to offer a different type of restaurant or a different restaurant tonight because I am unwilling to be with the potential consequences. I'm unwilling to, it's so not okay with me if they get mad that I'm unwilling to do that. But then that ultimately it becomes a choice rather than my life being dictated by external circumstances. So again, if you're going to be looking at your life and just going, okay, where in my life, it's both really the sense of where in my life could I be more sovereign? Could I create more sacred sovereignty in my life? And or with no blame, shame, or judgment, the willingness simply to actually look at reality and say, where am I currently allowing my life to be dictated by external circumstances? And there's a lot of ways that you could do this inquiry, but the two that I was suggesting, inviting, recommending, the sort of simple version is any place in your life that you look and you go, I can't fill in the blank because fill in the blank with some external circumstances. That might be like, physical, like I can't do something because of the way my house is. I can't do something because another person. Anything that's outside of your own being is external circumstances. So I can't ... because ... some external circumstances. Or I have to fill in the blank because, again, fill in the blank with some external circumstances. I have to call my mother because if I don't, da 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 da. I have to blah blah blah, rather than I choose to, because these are the circumstances I choose to create in my life. So any place, and it really is important to be willing to enter into this kind of like accounting of our lives without any blame, shame, or judgment, because that is what allows us to get like true accounting, or what I might call right relationship with reality. It's just like, this is actual reality about how I am relating to it right now. So that's the external circumstances piece. The second piece of that, and so again, this is where I see most conversations around sovereignty stop, is like, you're sovereign and you don't, like, nobody else's behavior can make you, they can't make you do anything or make you feel, or like, it's like, yes, that's true. And the second pillar in my framework is the recognition that my life is not dictated by internal circumstances. And this one is a lot trickier for people because we tend to identify very strongly with our internal circumstances. So, but again, this becomes any place that, just like with the external circumstances, we can say, I can't fill in the blank because, but then fill in the second blank with some sort of internal experiences, because I don't feel like it, because I'm tired, because I'm so ashamed, because I'm angry, because I haven't forgiven them, because, but any place we make that I can't because fill in the blank about the internal circumstances, we are also allowing our life to be dictated by internal experiences or internal circumstances. Similar. And then the other one is I have to blank because, and then fill in the second blank with some sort of internal circumstances. And these ones can be harder to tease out. One of the easier ways to do this, again, this would be like a longer sort of journaling process or a longer inquiry if I wasn't live right now. So if you're watching the replay, or if you come back and watch the replay, you could actually pause and you could do this, or you can do this later today or tomorrow. But first is even just to take stock of any place in your life that I can't because, and don't even worry about what the because is yet, but any place like I can't because, or I have to because. And just know that for starters, like, those are areas that you're allowing either internal or external experiences to dictate your life. And I want to bring it back to this place where that doesn't mean that our internal and our external circumstances do not impact us and that they might influence our choices, but it is really different. So again, to use the example for external circumstances around, I can't go for a walk, after 7 o'clock at night because my kids are asleep in their beds at home, and I live alone with my children right now. Now that's true, but it's more true would be to say, I'm not going to go for a walk after my children are in bed. Now I get to choose actually when they go to bed, so I could go for a walk after 7 o'clock if I put them to bed later and I took them with me, or I could choose to go for a walk after they're in bed, but I choose not to do that given the ages that they are, et cetera, because I am unwilling to meet the potential consequences of that. In a couple years, when they're older and I have a conversation about it, then I probably would. There's still actual risk involved, but I'm more likely to be willing to meet that risk. Or because I've been unwilling to ask someone to come and sit in my house while I take a walk alone after 7 o'clock, right? There's all these creative solutions that start to arise when we're willing to say, this is a choice I'm making, rather than I have to or I can't. Internal circumstances, again, it's really tricky, and this is why this needs to be done without blame, shame, or judgment, because it's so easy to start to make these moralistic, and that's not it's not the spirit of this. The spirit is actually just honesty about what's so, and then choose it or change it. One or the other is totally, totally fine. So for instance, like I can say like, I have to go to bed. I'm using my children for some reason as examples today. I have to go to bed by 10:30 because my children are always awake by 6:30 in the morning. And I have a lot of data to back that up. I don't know what 365 times 10 is, but it's a lot. But I choose, and I actually many nights don't choose to go to bed at 10:30, but I don't have to go in order to get enough sleep. Or I can say like, I can't do early morning practice. You know, some people, parents, have all this time in the morning because their kids like sleep in the morning. I've always been like, I can't do early morning practice because my children wake up at 6:30. And then it's really, I guess this is external circumstances again, but I'm thinking because I'm tired. So it's more the sense of like, I can't wake up and do early morning practice because I'm too tired. And then it's like, no, I choose to rest instead, or I choose this instead. So an internal circumstance would be, sometimes one of the ones that I see a lot is people sort of like, I can't, sometimes it's around like marketing themselves or continuing to take action in their work in the world because they're feeling something so intensely. And sometimes that's shame or it's sadness. And there's this idea is like everything has to stop because of my internal circumstances. Either I'm tired or I don't feel like it or I'm ashamed. And to attend to that, and I see that, I've spoken about this a lot, I see that as this pendulum swing from a time, you know, and in some places this is still quite present, but when it was all about like buck up and shove your feelings down and none of that's welcome, you know, and just keep going, push through. And the pendulum has swung to everything must stop to attend to my internal experience, and that somehow it's inauthentic to, you know, make a Facebook Live if I'm feeling shitty today, or, you know, keep writing my book if I'm in the midst of shame, or, you know, like all these sort of things. It's like, actually, it's totally possible to actually give space for feeling and continue to step forward. And so really just taking sort of an honest look at any place I can't do blank because, and some internal experience, or I have to do blank, and then because of some internal experience. And again, it can become like, no, actually I choose to stop work early today because I have some deep sadness I want to attend to. And it's just a very, very different place to relate to ourselves. This can also come in the form of, so that's like the emotional realm. I would also say thought patterns. We tend to imagine that we're somehow victim to our thought patterns, which are often shame thought patterns, self-criticism thought patterns, self-judgment thought patterns. And, you know, I've had this knowing for a long time, and I've spoken about it in certain ways, but I saw it modeled incredibly clearly when I sat with Clarissa Pinkola Estes recently. And she's the author of Women Who Run with the Wolves, among many, many, many other offerings, and a deep, deep teacher. And one thing that I saw when I was with her last month that was so profound was her speaking to, teaching about, and then working with people in this realm where she really was talking about relating to our own like sort of self-critical, self-judgment, you know, thought patterns that make us freeze in the same way that we would if someone was bringing abuse towards us externally. She's like, no, you say, stop. This is not welcome. Not now. Now is not the time. I do not consent to this. So the same way that if somebody, you know, either on the street or just in your family, you know, in your house started saying like, you know, you're full of shit, you have nothing good, you'd be like, don't talk to me like that, like stop. But somehow we think we're not allowed to stop our own thoughts like that. Like we become victim to our own thought patterns. Like but it's me, or like, this is my authentic thought. It's like, no, this is a hurtful, abusive thought pattern. You just are doing it to yourself rather. If somebody else was talking to you like this, I mean, some of us have things to work out in this realm as well in terms of boundaries, but objectively, all of us would be like, you tell that person to stop. Like, they are not welcome near you while they are talking to you like that. And that we have the power, the capacity, the right actually to literally say, no, stop, not now. This is not the time. You are not welcome. And that this is different. There's actually a discernment in using that's different than the squashing, the shutting down, the like it's not okay to feel the negative emotions. And it is important that we are doing the work also to give space to the parts of us that are afraid or ashamed or sad or, all these different pieces, and get the support that we need. But that is in the realm of the recognition that my life is not dictated by my internal circumstances in the same way that my life is not dictated by my external circumstances. So I'm going to pause before I move on to the second two pillars. And first of all, just a reminder, please feel free to bring any questions, whether they're clarifying about what I'm saying or questions about, well, how would this apply in this part of my life? Or, you're probably right, but this one really seems like it's dictating my life. Happy for all of that. And any place that this is true or has lived out in your life or you're practicing this, all welcome. So Stephen said, trying to manage someone else's response to what you want gives away choice. I agree. And, ultimately it's manipulation. We don't like to think about it that way because we often like to think, oh, I'm taking care of them, or I don't want to hurt them, or it's manipulation. And caring about other people, we can include, well, I care about the impact this is going to have, and not be like, I have to do this so that they don't feel this, or so that they don't do this. Any place that it's I have to or I can't, we can be sure that we're allowing some external circumstance, again, whether that's somebody else's response or something else, and our compulsion to manage it, we're allowing that to dictate our life. And then Julia said, finally reading this book. I think you're talking about Women Who Run with the Wolves. And I'll just, little side note here, say I have actually never read the book in its entirety. I'm now working on that, having been with Dr. Estes and spent a week with her. And she's very clear, just this is a total side note, but she's like, I wrote the book in a certain way. I wrote it in order. It's meant to go in order. And I thought this is like a really beautiful, I think many books like that, or like inspirational books, we don't do this with novels usually, where we just open and we see what's the paragraph that's meant for me today? We go no, there's a story, and we read it from start to finish. The one book that I don't read like that is The Time Traveler's Wife, but it's only because I have read it so many times. I probably read that book 20 times. I love that book. And then also it is sort of in and out of time. And so when I want to read, but I'm not ready to, or I don't have the energy to start a whole new story with new characters and understanding and places, I just open up The Time Traveler's Wife and I just start reading. I invariably then finish it and start at the beginning again until I get to where I started. And so that was that was like a commercial break for books. But I've started now Women Who Run with the Wolves at the very beginning, and I'm really taking my time and reading piece by piece all the way through start to finish. And it's quite profound. So the third pillar is the capacity to limit choices in service of true freedom. And this is very, very specific. There's a way that this actually takes pillar 1 and pillar 2 and kind of weaves them together, but it is also specific. And maybe it's partly specific to the time that we live in, the times, the era that we live in, which is, I think we're beyond the information age at this point. And I have a friend who wrote a piece that talked about, I think he even wrote this maybe 5 to 10 years ago, but he was now we're in the transformation age. But even so, the point of this is that we're in an era of choice. And I think this probably began most specifically like after World War II. So this is not new, but it has been building and building and building and building, where our choices are not just, like post World War II, there was an enormous sort of opening around like being able to buy things, like our choices in consumption. But really this is actually like an external circumstances dictated this, right? There were policy decisions that were made about marketing like time-saving devices to stay-at-home moms, these, and so the choice in it is really less choice than we think it is. So that was, that's like post-World War II era in terms of that. Also a lot of travel, air travel opened up in a way that had, I'm not saying this started then, but there was like a real explosion in terms of both just travel for pleasure and where do I want to be in the world, but also people really moving and not staying in the same place, not then raising their families in the same place that they were raised, and probably their, or even the same state or the same country, or this like sort of, it's really started at that point, and you can see this dramatic increase, and then it's just been exponential. And of course, most of the people, in my general age range, which we're just going to call anywhere from like 30 to 50, is where we've seen that in terms of technology and information, and not just radio and not just TV and not just the number of channels and not just newsprint, like where we really had, that was already growing again, sort of post World War II, this upsurgence in different places where we could get our news and our information, but with the internet and, and now with, again, it's been like 11 years since the iPhone was created. We had smartphones before that. And so, again, it was like there was like this slow burn that just exploded with the invention of the iPhone. And the amazing thing is, I was listening to a podcast recently. I love it. I'm actually watching my viewership drop while I talk about this. I find this fascinating. But the iPhone was initially brought into the market and marketed as a merging between your phone and your iPod, so that people wouldn't need two devices. And then, but what it's become, now we know, like, pretty much no one has an iPod because, like, there just isn't the need for it and stuff like that. But what it's become is so much bigger. And so not only having so much information available on the internet, but having it literally in your back pocket or your purse or your front pocket, or like in your hand or right next to you on the desk, and being in contact with, so then, add Facebook to that, add Twitter, add Instagram. And it's not just, what you can search, like what you can go to the internet and search, but it's like going and just like people are like giving you information, right? You just go and it's like, who's saying something today? What friend do I want to connect with, right? So choice has become massive. And inside of this, again, I think it's important actually in some ways to see that some of this has actually been dictated by external reality. Like, there is an actual selling, if you will, of the idea that more choice is better. More choice means freedom. And that's not always true. And it has been packaged that way on purpose. Some of that has come from, there were places where things were truly limited and narrow, where people were truly, were actually limited by lack of choices or by lack of information, or, you think about, again, this is a very, very, very long time ago, but where all Christian texts, for instance, were in Latin or were in a different language and only certain people could read it, right? So that's control through limiting. But there is also a certain kind of control that comes through selling the idea that if you have more choices, you'll be more free. And what they're really saying is buy more. Buy more things, and that equates freedom. And most of us have bought into this idea at some point that it's been sold. It's like, if I can have everything I want, if I have all the choices at my disposal, then I am more free. And there is a real, so this idea of sacred sovereignty and truly like taking that back for oneself. Now I get to choose. And sometimes that means intentionally and consciously limiting our choices. Sometimes for a period of time, some, you know, this like again, you get to say, but limiting choice in a way that actually allows for more freedom. And I have this sort of silly example. I mean, honestly, I see it like all the freaking time. I remember one time, maybe somewhere between 5 and 10 years ago, and I saw a billboard. I was driving between San Francisco and the East Bay, one direction or the other. So I was like getting on the bridge or getting off the bridge, and there was like a billboard for like a new kind of chip. And they were kind of marketing it as like, you know, the new kind of chip, like, because you need this new chip that's better than all the other chips. And I was just like, the world like so doesn't need a new option for chips. Like we have so many options for chips, and it's a chip. And there really are, there's like corn and flour and, you know, potato, and there's baked, and there's fried, and there's made out of vegetables, and there's gluten free. They're like already all of those existed. And we just like didn't need a new option for chips. So I mean, you can see it just like freaking everywhere. But the time that I think that I very first noticed this for myself, and where this actually, I didn't have the language of sacred sovereignty at the time. I was 16 or 17 years old. Yeah, somewhere between 15 and 17 years old. So I didn't have the language around sovereignty, and I didn't really understand this as a piece around choice and limiting choices. And, you know, I didn't have all of this life experience that I've had now at 42, but I could already feel the way that it stole and sucked my energy to have these choices. And what happened was that when I was in high school, we used to have this amazing opportunity to go to the desert over spring break. And I went every year I was in high school. And for some reason, I'm thinking we had 2 weeks, because we had this long trip, and we would spend the first part in one part of the desert and the second part we would either go to Anza Borrego or to Death Valley, depending on our age. And then for the second half, we all met, and it was all the ages together, but we were all in high school, excuse me. And we would meet in Joshua Tree. And I mean, I could go on about this because it was an extraordinary, like life-changing experience that this was offered to me by these teachers who really spearheaded getting us, you know, out in like this raw form of nature, and really breaking down our ideas around like how things had to be. Like we would do, you know, now this is like, doesn't even seem like that big of a deal, but if you consider that this is a good more than 20 years ago, they would, you know, they take us in the desert, and one night they would have all the girls dress up like boys and all the boys dress up like girls. And it was like switch night. Like all the girls had to ask the boys to dance or take them to dinner, and the girls, like they would like switch everything. And one night we would all put on skits, and, you know, there were just all these things that we did that really broke us out of the realm of what was, you know, normal, acceptable, expected of us. So there are many things I could say about that. But ultimately what happened is I came back, I was dirty. Nobody showers the whole time, you know, and we're camping. And I went to the grocery store to buy soap. And I ended up I was either in like Safeway or Long's, because those were the places that I went when I was a teenager in my hometown. And I remember going into the aisle and being overwhelmed by the soap options. And I stood there, and I think I was very sensitive to it, because I had just been completely, we didn't even have the term off the grid at that point, right? Because like the internet, I don't even know if, the internet probably existed, but I didn't know about it. And we didn't have cell phones or smartphone or any of these kinds of things, but we didn't have any media, and we didn't use any phones. Like we were just camping this whole time. And so I felt very sensitive to walking into the store and suddenly being flooded by soap options. And it's sort of like a light bulb went off in that moment. I was like, this is just soap, but like this is true about everything. And I must have spent 15 minutes standing like in this one section of the store, you know, going like, well, this one, if I buy 3 is actually cheaper than if I buy this one. So I kind of feel like I should buy this 3, but I don't really like this kind of soap. And like, what do they smell like? And like, why are there even so many options? and I could feel not only it was like a waste of my time, basically, to stand there for 15 minutes and the way that is sucked for me, but it was an energetic thing where I got overwhelmed and confused and, this sort of piece. And it was the first time that I had this recognition of the way that more choices does not necessarily equal more freedom. And that oftentimes our capacity to limit our choices actually affords us what I would call true freedom, which is essential for sacred sovereignty. So that is a kind of, in a way, it requires a certain sovereignty already, even to be able to look at this and go like, where in my life would it serve for me to limit my choices for a period of time? Because I know that by doing that, it would actually allow me so much more freedom. Again, like very, very tangible examples might be, I only go to the grocery store, 2 times a week at these times, and otherwise I just figure out what to eat that's in my house. Because I know a lot of people who end up feeling they feel oppressed by like, oh, I have to go to the grocery store every day because I just, we don't have the things, or because I have to cook for the kids all the time, or, blah, 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 blah. And so there's this way, it was like, yeah, if I only go those times and I limit that and I say, okay, we're going to try as a family. We're only going to the grocery store on Monday morning and, Wednesday afternoon. And we have plenty of food in our house, so it might not be exactly what we want, but we're going to do that and see what freedom does it afford us to not be at the grocery store every single day, sort of going like, what do we want to eat today? I mentioned this the other day when I was teaching these pillars inside another woman's program. I was like, it would probably afford me more freedom if I literally took out like half of the clothes in my closet. And I don't even have to get rid of them immediately. I could put them like in a box in storage. But if I just limited my choices to like half my clothes, I would probably feel more free. Because even though I have a ton of clothes and I always have something to wear, and there's something for all the seasons and all the options and all these, I am one of those people, I'm a little embarrassed to admit, but I am one of those people who walks into my closet on a regular basis and thinks I have nothing to wear. And I would actually probably have less of that if I limited my choices in my closet. If I wasn't like, but what about this? And what about this? If I was just like, this is it. It's another option. I don't know, I'll see if something else comes, but there are these things where it's like, I'm going to limit my choices. Again, it could be around like the soap. It's like, I just buy like bulk this and that's it. And I don't have to think about soap, and whatever like attention is like taken up by thinking about what laundry detergent to buy and what soap to buy and what, it's just like, that's just handled for the next 3 months. And that gets freed up to do something else. So when we limit our choices purposely, right? Like not when someone else limits our choices or when we think that society is telling us that we have limited choices, but when we look at our life and we say, if I limited myself in these ways, if I actually removed choice, how would that afford me more freedom? This is essential for like real sacred sovereignty. And the final, so in a way this is tricky. It's like I put the 4th pillar at the end. It's kind of the first pillar, but it also has to go in this order. The 4th pillar of sacred sovereignty is the recognition of interdependence, which includes both agency and communion. So the reason that it kind of belongs at the beginning is again, what I've talked about is like, I see sovereignty talked about a lot more now than I did like 4 years ago, which is great. I think even just having this conversation around what does it mean to be sovereign is fantastic. But so often it is limited to this idea of like, unto myself, I'm separate. I get to make my decisions. I set my boundaries. I'm not responsible for you. Like I'm sovereign is separate. And to me, that is fundamentally false. So that's the place where most conversation around sovereignty gets stopped at the first pillar, which is the recognition that my life is not dictated by external circumstances. And that is true. And it is also true that we have interdependence, and that any conversation, really any conversation, that any conversation about wholeness, about sovereignty, about what it is to be a human being is incomplete unless it involves a conversation about the ways in which we are connected. And there's another post that I wrote at some time last week that was around this idea of being self-made. You know, there's like self-made man was kind of the origination of this. You know, I think a lot of that in the United States really does, again, it comes back to this idea of the American dream and pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and anyone can do it if you just work hard enough. But we still, to this day, even those of us who, you know, might not buy into the American dream or think that we've sort of like stepped out of the system, we like to think of ourselves as self-made. Or the stories of people who came from rags to riches are really, you know, they're very powerful for people. They're exciting. They evoke something in us. We kind of all want to be that person. And rags to riches can be both financial. It can also be emotional, in the sense that we love a story about, you know, like, my life circumstances were so hard. I got no both maybe financial but also emotional support from my family, and look who I've become anyway. And it's tricky because, and this is why I say agency and communion and interdependence as opposed to dependence or independence, is that I am absolutely sure that it is true for anyone who speaks about themselves in that way, or for many of you who are watching, is that you have worked really, really hard, and you have created incredible things for yourself. And probably the life circumstances that you were raised in were challenging. And many of you got very little support from your family, whether that meant very little financial support or very little emotional, energetic support for the being that you are. That can all be true, while also acknowledging all of the causes and conditions and forces and energies and people and circumstances and systems and all of the things that have woven together that allowed you to be born in the first place, that allowed you to be born wherever you were born, that allowed you to step outside of the circumstances perhaps that you were born into, or that afforded you other opportunities, or the gifts that, you know, whatever your relationship to God or source are, that perhaps you were simply given, you know, certain kinds of fortitude or grace or resilience or intelligence. And that does not detract from, I worked my fucking butt off and I studied like crazy. And it's important to recognize both and to really give ourselves credit for, like, yeah, I have worked hard and I have created things, and I was given immense gifts. Some of them tangible, some of them intangible, some of them I don't even know from whence they come. And some of them I can track back to, you know, blood ancestors or mentors or circumstances of my life. And again, to make this very tangible, that can go all the way from acknowledging that I have privileges simply because I was born with light skin. And that does not detract from the fact, like, if I'm just going to talk about literally me, I'll make this real personal so that none of you, I am not saying anything about any of you, that I have been afforded privileges by being born with light skin. And I know that. There are circumstances that I know that I was able to skate through that could very well have gone so much differently if I was not, you know, basically came from like an educated sort of middle class. And I don't mean that economically necessarily, but like my lineage is a white upper middle class educated family and female, you know, and sort of the privilege that has afforded me. And that does not negate that the actual circumstances of my childhood were incredibly poor, and my mother and I were on food stamps, and that I, you know, that I was incredibly embarrassed actually by my circumstances growing up, because many, many people around me had so much more money than we had so little money, and there were so many things that I did not have because of that. However, kind of being like the fact that we were more like transitionally poor, if you will, but like my lineage is this upper middle class educated white culture, and that allowed us to fit into an area, even though we were incredibly poor and lived in a trailer, like on a plot of land in the middle of nowhere with no electricity and no indoor toilet. But I went to this incredible school system that, you know, again, like I could have been rejected from the culture if I looked different, if I sounded different. The privilege that this is like one of those like grace of God, you know, I mean, both I give gratitude to my mother, and then also this sort of grace of God. I was born into a Buddhist monastery. Like, I did nothing for that. And yet, you know, where have I taken that? Where have I grown? Where have I taken things and myself? Like, yes, I can still acknowledge and praise myself for what I have done with these teachings and these learnings, while acknowledging that that's grace. That was given to me, that I had the absolute good fortune to be raised amongst extraordinary human beings who were fundamentally doing their best to better themselves, and what being around people like that gave me. Not to mention what being raised like in the midst of wilderness gave me just at a nervous system level is extraordinary. So I use the words agency and communion. Interdependence is the way I look at like kind of what I'm talking about, where we can acknowledge both the hardship of our lives and the grace of our lives, or the privilege, or what has been given to us, all the circumstances that afforded us immense opportunity. And I really encourage, you know, I think that people actually feel shame, self-judgment, embarrassment about all kinds of circumstances. So mine had happened to be around, you know, being poor. And some people as adults feel very embarrassed if they received financial support from their parents. And so then they don't want to say it. And so there's this emphasis on the self-made part of them, rather than being able to say, you know what, I don't know if I would be where I am today if my parents, you know, hadn't been able to pay off my student loans, or put me through college, or give me a place to stay when I needed it. You know, some people, like, I mean, probably if I'd been desperate, I could have gone home to my mom. But after I left for college, my mom moved out of our house and moved into like this itty bitty little studio that had no space for me. I had no room to go back to. And when I needed to leave college for like my emotional and energetic well-being, I did not have a home to go back to, except I did, which is that I went back to the monastery in which I was raised. So again, it's like, how do we tell the nuance of all the different circumstances of our lives? Every single piece of that is true. And our sovereignty actually comes from our capacity to see all the different parts of it, and to acknowledge the truth of our own self-generated, you know, hard work, or resilience, or stick-with-itness, or to go through hard times, or to make it, you know, as a single mother, or divorcing from our, you know, just all the hard circumstances of our life. And simultaneously to acknowledge the interdependence. I mean, I take it all the way. You can keep it really tangible, but there is a realm that I believe is just as true, which is like, just that any of this exists at all. Like, that I even get an opportunity at life is like, it's like a complete miracle that I did nothing for, as far as, you know, as far as I'm concerned, my own sort of belief system. And I believe it actually only makes us more powerful to be willing to actually give up, like, you know, give up gratitude for the miracle that is. So the agency and communion piece, in a way, is the more present day, a little bit less about acknowledging all the circumstances that have allowed us even to exist in this moment, and be willing to give gratitude for all of them, and at the same time as acknowledging ourselves for the role that we played in it. We're not outside that circle either, right? Like, all the circumstances that allowed us to be right where we are now, we're one of those circumstances, but we're just one of them. That, right? That's the interdependence piece. Agency and communion is like the present day piece, which acknowledges that my life is not dictated by external circumstances, and I am both impacted by external circumstances and I impact them. So agency is the part that's like, it is true. I'm a separate being over here. Where my skin is where your skin is, those are two different places. We are different human beings, and I have agency, and I get to choose where I put my body, what I do with my body, how I spend my time, my attention. I have agency. And communion is that part that's like, and we're connected. And I impact you and you impact me. And how do we allow those two things to weave together in every single moment of every single day for the rest of our lives? And that's the dance. That's the beauty of it. And at any time that most conversations around sovereignty will stick with agency. I have agency, and that means I'm sovereign. But actually, if I am unwilling to acknowledge communion, my life will be dictated by it, because it is an actual natural law. You do impact me, and I do impact you. And the heat right now is impacting me. And I impacted the woman at the grocery store this morning who I pointed out that one of her children's shoes had dropped so that she didn't leave the grocery store without it. You know, like we do this. We get to impact people, and being willing to acknowledge like, oh, I did something and it hurt somebody, or it actually, you know, somebody had a worse day because of something I said, or I caused more chaos and fear here. It is actually gives us just as much power as the willingness for me to go, you know what, I lit somebody up when I complimented them out of the blue today, or I really, you know, helped that mom in the grocery store because I pointed out that shoe to her, and she, you know, maybe just because of the $40 it fucking costs to buy like baby shoes, and maybe because she's like, hey, like someone's looking out for me. We impact each other that way. Melanie asks, can you talk a bit about sacred sovereignty and relating to another, the weaving, when hurt or anger or emotions are in play? So I'll say a little bit, and I would also love, like, if there's any specific example, that would be super helpful, because that's a really big topic. So and it might be like a very, very specific true example from your life right now, or it might be kind of like, well, you know, this might not be exactly specific to my life, but like this is a scenario in which, how would I relate to sacred sovereignty in this? And some of it, so to start kind of at the macro, and great, I'll talk a little bit and you write your example in there, and then we'll see where that goes. At the macro level is even just as we become aware of both agency and communion, in any moment there is that, you know, like I'm relating to someone and they're upset with me, or like they're upset about something that I've done, is the willingness to go like, okay, both are happening right now. So in which part of this do I want to hold agency, and which part of this do I want to hold communion? The truth is that we're impacting each other. Somehow I did something and they're upset, and now their upset is impacting me. And yet at the same time, I now have agency. They may not be aware that they have agency, right? So that's part of, like, as beings who are cultivating our sacred sovereignty, we have to be aware that other people may not be, and they may not want to be, and they may never be. And then, you know, and part of agency is I get to choose how I relate to people when it seems like that's not a value that they have. And again, there's not one right answer. This doesn't fall one way or the other. There are some people, it's like, yeah, maybe I'm not going to, you know, get married to you or raise a child with you if it seems like you don't have any interest in cultivating your own agency, or noticing where are you sovereign, or where is your life not being dictated by my response. But, you know, I have a family member where that's a pretty big part of it. And I'm like, it's at a point where, you know, I'm kind of choosing my own sovereignty in that, is actually going like, oh, I hear you. That makes sense. That sounds really hard, rather than trying to convince this person over and over that they actually have agency. So let's see, your specific example. I reveal my hurt to someone and their response is to go silent for days and then share later that they don't know what to say. Great. So there's a couple layers to that. And one layer, and I'm going to talk about this in the broadest sense. I know, Melanie, you can probably tease out some different pieces because I know that, you know, we've worked together in the past and you have a lot of practice in your body and in your awareness. And I especially really want to make this applicable to like men and women, masculine and feminine. So I'm not going to go super, super specific. But in the broadest sense, one way to look at that, like an agency way to look at that, is also like, oh, is there a way that I could have created a different container? And again, I'm going to kind of give this to you specifically, Melanie, but I don't want necessarily for this to detract from other people, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to do the container. But what part could I have played in there being a different container that would have allowed this person to have a different response? Could I have asked for it? Could I have asked for them to set a container? Could I, like, how could this have come about so that there was a clear container in which to receive their response rather than silent for days and days? From the silent from days and days, now I don't know this person, I don't actually know, you know, the truth for them, but I can also relate to the part of me that sometimes goes silent when I don't know what to do. And so one of the things that, so there's my own personal practice around that. But again, we don't always know where other people are in their personal practice. So it might be that there, again, it becomes sort of a container or an agreement or a way of relating in which the invitation is, hey, I would love, I want your I don't know. So whatever your response is, including when I hear that I don't know what to do, I want that. And that creates a certain kind of communion. That may or may not be true for you specifically, Melanie, but I would say any place that we're wanting more relationality, we're wanting the communion, is inviting somebody in a way that invites them. So so a lot of times people, and I relate to this, is I don't know creates like a freeze response. Like, I don't know, so I do nothing. And often then it becomes incumbent upon the person who has the more awareness or the big more resources to make sure. It's not about making it safe in the traditional sense of the word, like I'm going to make sure that they don't get upset, but somehow making that space clear to welcome the I don't know. Just going to pause for a minute. I would also say, just as a human being, most of us have tendencies towards either agency or communion. And sometimes they get kind of mixed up. But most of you, if you really notice, is that you'll see, like, when you feel a little stressed or when you feel fear or when you're like, something like that, is that your tendency is to go to like, I'll handle it, or I need to retreat in some way. Like I go into agency when I'm under stress or under resourced or afraid. And that's a habit response. And other people go towards like, let me fix it. Let me make sure we talk. And like, I can't have any space between us because communion is where I'll feel safe. Like agency is where I'll feel safe, or like communion is where I'll feel safe. So both of those are habit responses. So one of the ways to work with agency and communion in the realm of sacred sovereignty is to notice where are your habit patterns, and rather than just like, well, I guess I should just do the opposite, is look at like what is a gentle, soft movement towards the other. If I tend towards agency, what is it to extend when I think I'm unwanted, or when I'm afraid, or when I think they're rejecting me? Where is the extension in that towards communion? Or if I'm we need to communicate about everything, like be in communion, we have to be close, I can't be separate from you because then I don't know that we're connected. I'm exaggerating both of these, so please know that I don't think this is necessarily you, certainly not you, Melanie, but also just people. Is what is it to draw your own energy into your own sovereignty, just again, like 1%, 5%? What is it to allow a little bit more breath inside my own space, or let an hour go by when it feels urgent to text or to reach out? So I would say actually at the highest level, that's one of the ways to work with the weave, is to start to look at where is my habit response and what is a gentle extension in the other direction. So I hope that gives a little something with the, in the example you gave, again, I don't know where this lives exactly for you, Melanie, but I would say it could have been that there was an extension from you, right, in the days of no communication. And if for instance, you had a habit response of agency in their non-response, that would be, but it would be like a gentle extension. Or if it sounds like you didn't go into the communion, although you might have in your own energetic, mind, body. Cool. I'm glad that was helpful. And it might be, it reveals that they're not available in the way that you want them to be. And then so again, if this is like an initial dating scenario, that might be very clear, and there's a releasing of somebody. And if there's a longer term relationship, allowing for they revealed themselves to not be available in the way that I wanted. What is it to hold both agency and communion with this person, in the sense of, even if they're not giving me what I want, if I still want some connection, do I have enough sovereignty inside myself to still extend, I actually still want to be related to you. That hurt. It hurt not to hear from you, and I want to be related to you. How do we hold the place where they need agency without without rigidity? And how do I hold actually my energetic, emotional, feeling self, that part of my life is not dictated by whether I get a response from them or not, nor is the truth of their impact on me not also true. So that's the weave. I think that I know it gets a little wild, but that's the weave. It's how do I actually allow both of these things to be true at the same time? So thank you for that question. For all of you who are here live, and I so appreciate the energy, the attention, the time of those of you who are here live, any of you who have been watching the replay, and I would love to continue this conversation. I'm going to end this call for now, but I look forward to more. Ciao.